You know, after all these years, you'd think I've seen it all. You'd think there's no family dynamic so twisted, no story so convoluted, that it could still make me sit back in my chair and just exhale. But then a case like this comes along. It's not about the shock value, not about the shouting or the theatrics you see in the promos. It's about the quiet poison that can run through a family, the kind that looks like love but feels like a slow motion robbery. This was one of those. The file landed on my desk with a title that was practically a cry for help dressed up as an accusation. My mother says I'm the problem, but she never tells you how she drained my bank account. Right away, I knew what I was dealing with. This isn't just about money. It's never just about money. Money is just the currency they use to trade in what really matters: control, guilt, approval, and a twisted sense of obligation. The daughter, we'll call her Ashley, was painted in the pre-interview notes as difficult, ungrateful, selfish. Her mother, Diane, came across as the long-suffering matriarch, a woman who had sacrificed everything for her children and was now being abandoned in her time of need. It's a classic script, one I've seen play out 100 times. The labels are always so neat and tidy: the problem child and the martyr mother. But my job is to rip the labels off and see what's really going on underneath. When I first met them backstage, the dynamic was palpable. It hung in the air thicker than the hairspray. Diane was perfectly put together. Her clothes were immaculate, her smile was ready, but her eyes were constantly scanning, assessing. She had this way of touching Ashley's arm, a gesture that looked like affection to the casual observer, but I saw it for what it was: an anchor, a subtle assertion of ownership. It was a non-verbal "you're with me. You'll play your part." Ashley, on the other hand, looked like she'd been holding her breath for a decade. She was in her late 20s, but had the exhausted posture of someone much older. Her shoulders were slumped, not in a lazy way, but in a way that suggested she was carrying an invisible weight. She wouldn't make direct eye contact with her mother. Instead, her gaze would dart around the room as if looking for an escape route she knew she wouldn't find. In our pre-chat, Diane did most of the talking. She wove a beautiful, tragic tapestry of her life. She was a single mother, worked 2 jobs, sacrificed her own happiness, her own chances at love, all for her children. She said things like, "All I ever wanted was for my kids to have a better life than I did, and I never asked for anything for myself. It's always for the family." Every sentence was designed to elicit sympathy, to position her as a saint. And when she talked about Ashley, her voice would drop into this tone of pained disappointment. She was always such a good girl, she'd say, sighing, so generous. I don't know what's happened to her. This new attitude, this selfishness, it's breaking my heart. I raised her to be better than this. Ashley just sat there picking at a loose thread on her jeans. She was a ghost in her own story. When I'd ask her a direct question, "Ashley, how do you see it?" she would hesitate. Her eyes would flick over to her mother for a split second, a subconscious check for permission. Then she'd give these vague apologetic answers. "I know I should help more," or "it's complicated," or "I just get overwhelmed." She was using the language of a guilty person, but her body language was screaming that of a victim. She was drowning, and the person holding her head under the water was sitting right next to her, patting her on the back and telling everyone what a good swimmer she used to be. The central problem wasn't a daughter who had suddenly become selfish. The central problem was a daughter who had been programmed from birth to be a solution to her mother's problems. She wasn't a person, she was a resource. Her bank account wasn't her own, it was the family emergency fund, except with Diane, everything was an emergency. The car needing new tires was an emergency. The property taxes being due was an emergency. A vacation she felt she deserved after a tough year was an emergency. And Ashley, the good girl, was the designated first responder. The conflict arose not because Ashley stopped giving, but because she was starting to run on empty. The well was dry, and she was finally, weakly trying to say no. And in Diane's world, no was the ultimate betrayal. It was an act of war. So she did what manipulators do. She reframed the narrative. It wasn't about her insatiable demands. It was about Ashley's defective character. and she was bringing that narrative to my stage hoping I'd co-sign it. She was in for a surprise. To really understand a situation like this, you have to go back. You have to trace the pattern to its origin. It doesn't start when the daughter gets her first good-paying job. It starts in the crib. It starts with the first time a child learns that her mother's smile is conditional. With Diane and Ashley, this was a master class in emotional programming. Diane didn't raise a daughter, she raised a caretaker. She raised a little girl whose primary function was to manage her mother's emotional state. We dug into it. We always do. We talked about her childhood, and the stories started to pour out, not just from Ashley, but from Diane herself, who offered them up as proof of what a special bond they had. She'd say things like, "Oh, Ashley was always so sensitive to my moods." Even as a little girl, if I was having a bad day, she'd come and pat my back and say, "It's okay, Mommy." She was my little rock. Now, a lot of people hear that and they think, how sweet. I hear that and a red flag goes up so big it blocks out the sun. A child's job is not to be her parent's rock. A child's job is to be a child. A parent's job is to be the rock. When you reverse those roles, you create what we call a parentified child. You're teaching them from the get-go that their needs come second to yours. You're teaching them that your emotional stability is their responsibility. So little Ashley learns, if Mommy is sad, I must fix it. If Mommy is angry, I must have done something wrong. If Mommy is happy, it's because I've been a good girl and met her needs. This creates a powerful, unspoken contract. The terms are, I, your mother, will give you love and approval, but only when you are serving my emotional and later financial needs. The moment you prioritize yourself, you are in breach of contract and the approval will be withdrawn. It's a devastatingly effective form of control because it's disguised as love. Then comes the money. As I said, it's never about the money, but the money is how they keep score. It started small. When Ashley was a teenager with a part-time job, it was, honey, can I borrow $20 for gas? I'll pay you back on Friday. But Friday would come and go. If Ashley ever brought it up, she'd be met with a wounded look. You're really going to hold $20 over your own mother's head after everything I do for you. And just like that, Ashley wasn't a creditor. She was a cruel, ungrateful child. She learned quickly it's easier to just let it go. When she went to college and got a better job, the stakes got higher. The requests became more frequent and more significant. It was always framed as a crisis, a desperate, one-time need. The transmission went out in the car and I can't get to work. If I lose my job, we'll lose the house. What's a daughter who has been programmed to be the family savior supposed to do? Of course she drains her savings to pay for the car. But here's the thing about manufactured crises. There's always another one right around the corner. The car was fixed, but then a month later it was a leaking roof. Then it was a medical bill. Then it was a credit card that had been maxed out on things Diane needed for the house. At some point, the pretense of borrowing was dropped entirely. It became an expectation. Diane had access to Ashley's online banking password under the guise of helping her manage it. She would move money from Ashley's savings to her own account and then explain it later. I had to, honey. The insurance premium was due. You wouldn't want us to lose our health insurance, would you? She had an answer for everything. And every answer was designed to make Ashley feel like a co-owner of the problem while being the sole provider of the solution. What was fascinating and heartbreaking was watching Ashley recount these events. She would describe being bled dry, but she'd do it in the most apologetic tone. I know she needed it, she'd say, wringing her hands. And she is my mother. I had been saving that money for a down payment on a small condo, but I guess that was selfish of me. Selfish. That word had been weaponized against her for so long that she now used it against herself. Diane had installed a little voice inside Ashley's head that did her dirty work for her. It was the voice that told her that having a boundary was selfish. Having a future of her own was selfish. Saying no was the ultimate sin. Diane, for her part, genuinely didn't see the issue. When I talked to her alone, she was completely convinced of her own righteousness. In her version of reality, she had sacrificed her youth and her happiness for Ashley. Therefore, Ashley's income wasn't just Ashley's income, it was a return on investment. It was Diane's retirement plan. It was her reward. She saw Ashley's desire for financial independence as a direct attack, as an attempt to rewrite the terms of their unspoken contract. She'd say, I don't ask for much. A little help now and then. Is that so wrong? I'm her mother. It's family. That's what families do. But what she was describing wasn't a family. It was a parasitic relationship. One person was the host and the other was slowly draining the life out of them all while calling it love. The groundwork was laid, the pattern was clear. Now it was time to put it on the stage and see what would happen when the lights came on. The escalation, the thing that finally drove them to my show, is almost always a moment when the host, in this case Ashley, starts to run out of resources. It's not a sudden moral awakening, it's a crisis of inventory. She simply had nothing left to give. She was in her late 20s, had a good job as a paralegal, but her bank account was a ghost town. She had student loans, a car payment, and a credit card debt that had been run up in large part by funding her mother's emergencies. She was living paycheck to paycheck, not because she was irresponsible, but because she was supporting two households on one salary. The breaking point came over something that on the surface seems trivial, but was symbolically massive. Ashley had a small bonus from her work, a couple $1,000s. It was the first time in years she'd had a lump sum of money that wasn't immediately earmarked for one of her mother's crises. She saw it as a lifeline. She didn't want to spend it on a vacation or a new wardrobe. She wanted to put it into an IRA, an individual retirement account. Think about the psychology of that. It was her first tangible step toward building a future that was solely her own. It was a declaration of independence, even if it was a quiet one she was only making to herself. She made the mistake of mentioning the bonus to her mother. You could see the regret on her face as she told the story. It was the flicker of a thought, I should have known better. Diane, of course, didn't hear I got a bonus. She heard there's money available. Within a week, the next emergency materialized. This time, it was a can't-miss investment opportunity a friend had told her about. It was vague, something about flipping a property, and it required a few $1,000s up front for a finder's fee. It was a classic get-rich-quick scheme, and Diane was completely sold on it. She presented it to Ashley not as a request, but as their shared golden ticket. This is it, honey. This is the thing that will solve all our problems. We'll be set for life. I just need that bonus to get us in the door. When Ashley hesitated for the first time in her life, she put up a real wall. She said, Mom, I can't. I already put that money away. It's for my retirement. Well, you would have thought she had confessed to burning down the family home. According to Diane, this was the ultimate act of betrayal. The narrative shifted instantly. It wasn't about a questionable investment anymore. It was about Ashley's selfishness, her lack of faith in her own mother, her cold-hearted cruelty. Diane unleashed a torrent of emotional blackmail. There were tears. There were accusations. After all, I've sacrificed for you. This is how you repay me. You'd rather hoard your money for when you're old than help your mother secure our future right now. She brought up every sacrifice, real or imagined, from the last 30 years. Every late night she worked, every school event she attended, every time she went without so Ashley could have something. Each memory was produced not as a token of love, but as an item on an invoice. It was the bill coming due. Then came the blame shifting. You just don't want to see me succeed. You like me being dependent on you, don't you? It makes you feel powerful. This is a classic tactic of a narcissist. When they're called out on their behavior, they accuse you of the very thing they're doing. Diane was the one who had engineered the dependency, but she was now painting Ashley as the manipulative one. The conflict tore the family apart. Diane enlisted other family members, her sisters, her cousins, telling them a heavily edited version of the story where Ashley was a heartless, money-grubbing daughter who was abandoning her poor, struggling mother. Ashley found herself isolated, bombarded with text and phone calls from relatives telling her she should be ashamed of herself. The pressure was immense. The good girl programming was kicking in hard. The guilt was overwhelming her. She was on the verge of caving, of liquidating her brand new retirement account just to make the noise stop. That was when her friend, the one person who knew the whole story, stepped in and suggested she write to my show. It was a Hail Mary. Ashley wasn't looking for fame or to air her dirty laundry. She was looking for a referee. She was looking for someone in a position of authority to look at the situation and tell her she wasn't crazy. Because that's what this kind of psychological manipulation does to you. It erodes your reality. You start to believe their version of events. You start to think, maybe I am the problem. Maybe I am selfish. Maybe I am ungrateful. She was so deep in the fog, she couldn't see the truth anymore. So they came here. Diane came believing I would be her greatest ally. She saw me as the ultimate authority figure who would look at her ungrateful daughter and set her straight. She thought she was bringing Ashley here for an intervention. She had no idea that she was the one who was about to be confronted with a reality she had spent a lifetime avoiding. The stage was set, the audience was in their seats, and I was ready to turn the lights on, not just for the cameras, but for Ashley, who had been living in the dark for far too long. When the lights came up on stage, the dynamic we'd seen backstage intensified. Diane was in her element. She played to the audience, her voice full of emotion, painting a portrait of a heartbroken mother. She was smooth practiced. She had her narrative down cold. Doctor, Phil, she began, her voice cracking just enough. I love my daughter more than life itself, but she's changed. This obsession with money, it's tearing us apart. A family is supposed to help each other. That's all I've ever taught her. She looked at Ashley with these big, sorrowful eyes, a look that said, how could you do this to me? Ashley, meanwhile, just shrank into the chair. She was physically folding in on herself, trying to become as small as possible. Every time her mother spoke, I could see her flinch, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. She was already defeated before we'd even started. My first job in a situation like this is to disrupt the script. They've come with a well-rehearsed play, and I have to be the one who walks on stage and points out the set is made of cardboard. I turned to Diane, keeping my voice very calm, very level. I said, Diane, I've looked at the numbers. We had a forensic accountant go through Ashley's bank statements for the last 3 years. Do you know what we found? That was the first crack in her composure. She wasn't expecting facts. She was expecting an emotional debate. Her eyes darted around for a moment. I don't know what you mean. I've occasionally borrowed money, yes, but I always intended to pay it back. That's not the word I would use, Diane, I said, and I held up a single piece of paper. In the last 36 months, over $70,000 has been transferred from Ashley's accounts to yours. $70,000. For a young woman making $50,000 a year before taxes, that's not borrowing. That's gutting. That's a financial vivisection. The audience let out a collective gasp. Ashley just stared at the floor, tears silently rolling down her cheeks. It was the first time she had ever heard the truth of her situation stated so plainly, so publicly, without apology. Diane's demeanor shifted. The wounded mother evaporated and the cornered fighter emerged. That's not true. Those are lies. She offered to help. She wanted to help. You're twisting everything. I'm not twisting anything, Diane. I'm just doing the math. I said, still calm. Let's talk about some of these emergencies. There was $5,000 for a roof repair. We called the roofer. The bill was $2,000. Where did the other $3,000 go? I didn't wait for an answer. There was $800 for a dental emergency. Your dentist's office confirmed you had a routine cleaning that was covered by your insurance. There was a $2,000 transfer labeled property taxes. Your taxes were only $1,200 that year. Over and over again, the numbers don't just fail to add up, they tell a story of deception. Her face hardened. The blame shifting went into overdrive. She gave me her password. She has to take responsibility for her own accounts. If she didn't want me to have the money, she should have said so. This is her fault for being so weak. And there it was, the core of it, the contempt she had for the very dependency she had cultivated. It's a common paradox with manipulators. They need you to be weak so they can control you, but they despise you for it. I turned to Ashley. Her face was ashen. Ashley, I said gently, look at me. Did you hear what your mother just said? She said, this is your fault for being weak. Is that what you believe? She shook her head, a tiny hesitant motion. I don't know. Well, I know, I said, leaning forward, and I'm telling you that is not true. You are not weak. You are a survivor of a 30-year-long campaign of psychological manipulation. You have been programmed since you were a little girl to believe that your only value lies in how well you serve your mother. You've been taught that having a need of your own is a character flaw. Saying no is not a sign of weakness, Ashley. In your world, it is the single most powerful and courageous thing you can do. It's an act of rebellion. It's an act of self-preservation. I could see something shifting behind her eyes, a flicker of recognition, a glimmer of anger. That's what I was waiting for. The breakthrough doesn't happen with tears. It happens when the victim's dormant sense of self-preservation finally wakes up. It happens with anger, healthy, righteous anger. I turned back to Diane. You didn't raise a daughter, Diane. You raised an income stream. You raised an emotional support animal. And the moment she tried to build a kennel for herself, you decided to put her down. You came on this show to publicly shame your daughter into giving you her retirement money for a phantom investment deal. Is that about the size of it? She was furious. Now the mask completely gone. You have no right. You don't know anything about my life or what I've been through. You sit up here in your fancy suit judging people. You're right, I am judging. I said, my voice firm but not shouting. I'm judging a mother who has financially and emotionally crippled her own child and has the audacity to call it love. I'm judging a woman who calls her daughter selfish for wanting to have a future. Let me be real clear with you. What you've been doing isn't mothering, it's theft. You've been stealing her money, you've been stealing her confidence, and you've been stealing her future. And the gravy train is over. It's stopping today. Right here, right now. At that moment, for the first time, Ashley sat up straight in her chair. She looked directly at her mother, and the fear in her eyes was being replaced by a cold fire I hadn't seen before. The breakthrough was happening. The puppet was about to cut her own strings. The air on set was electric. This is the moment I live for, not for the drama, but for the raw, unvarnished truth that cuts through years of denial. Ashley took a deep breath, a breath that seemed to come from the soles of her feet as if she was drawing up strength she didn't know she had. She turned her body in the chair to face her mother fully, a nonverbal cue that the dynamic had just fundamentally shifted. The subordinate was no longer subordinate. No more, she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was clear and steady. It resonated with a finality that silenced the entire studio. Diane stared at her, genuinely shocked. She had lost control of the room, and more importantly, she had lost control of her daughter. She tried to fall back on her old tactics, her voice softening into a wounded, pleading tone. Ashley, honey, what are you saying? You don't mean that. This man is putting words in your mouth. No, Ashley said, again shaking her head. He's not. He's putting words to what I've been feeling my whole life. My whole life, Mom, I have felt like an ATM. I have felt like my only purpose was to make you happy, to fix your problems. Do you have any idea what I want? Have you ever once asked me what my dreams are? Of course I have, Diane protested, but her response was hollow. I want you to be happy. No, you want me to be happy making you happy, Ashley shot back, and the speed of her retort showed the dam of resentment was breaking. Every time I had a win, a promotion, a bonus, your first question wasn't, how are you going to celebrate? It was, oh, that's wonderful. Now we can finally fix thee. And you'd fill in the blank. The deck, the driveway, the trip you wanted to take. My successes were never mine. They were just new inventory for you to spend. She stood up. It was a powerful move. She was no longer the little girl being scolded, but a woman standing her ground. The $70,000, I knew it was a lot, but I never let myself add it up. Because if I added it up, I would have to admit what was really happening. I would have to admit that my own mother, the person who was supposed to protect me, was using me, draining me. She walked over to my chair and took the piece of paper with the accountant's summary on it. She held it in her hand, not looking at it, but feeling the weight of it. "This piece of paper," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "this is my future. This is the down payment on the condo I'll never buy. This is the retirement I'll never have. This is the money for my own kids someday, kids I'm afraid to have because I don't know how to be a mother without being you." That was the kill shot. The accusation landed with a brutal impact. For the first time, Diane looked truly lost. The anger drained from her face, replaced by something that looked like genuine pain or perhaps just the shock of being seen so completely. Her entire identity was built on the foundation of being a good mother, a martyr who sacrificed everything. In one sentence, Ashley had bulldozed that foundation. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment. This was Ashley's stage now. I was just a facilitator. So this is what's going to happen. Ashley continued her voice, gaining strength with every word. She was speaking to her mother, but also, I think, to herself. She was making a vow. I am changing my bank account password. Today, you will no longer have access to my money. I am going to see a therapist to figure out how to build boundaries. And I will not give you any more money. Not for car repairs, not for medical bills, not for investment opportunities, no more. "You'll let me lose my house," Diane whispered, a last-ditch effort at guilt. "You will figure it out," Ashley said, her voice devoid of malice but full of resolve. "The same way, I'm going to have to figure it out. You're a grown woman. You can get another job. You can downsize. You can learn to live within your means. What you can't do anymore is live on my means." This is where the story can go one of two ways. In a fairy tale ending, the mother breaks down, confesses her sins, apologizes, and they walk into the sunset to rebuild a healthy relationship. But that's not real life. Real life is messy. Narcissistic patterns are deeply ingrained, often the result of their own generational trauma. They don't just vanish in a puff of stage smoke. Diane's reaction was not one of remorse. It was one of cold, reptilian fury. Her mask of victimhood slipped away to reveal a face of pure contempt. She looked at her daughter as if she were a stranger, an enemy. "Fine," she spat, her voice low and venomous. "You want to be on your own. Be on your own. But don't you come crawling back to me when you're lonely. Don't you call me on Christmas. Don't you ever ask me for anything. You're dead to me." She stood up, turned her back on her daughter, and walked off the stage. No wave to the audience, no glance back, just an exit. The audience was stunned into silence. It was a brutal, ugly end to the confrontation. Ashley stood there holding that piece of paper, watching her mother walk out of her life. She was trembling, but she didn't collapse. She didn't run after her. She stood her ground. She had paid an incredible price for her freedom, a price no child should ever have to pay. She had chosen herself, and in doing so, she had been disowned. This is the hard reality I talk about. Change is not a clean, neat process. For Ashley to get healthy, she had to be willing to lose the very relationship that was making her sick. It's a terrifying choice. But as she stood there, I didn't see a victim anymore. I saw a woman who had just survived a war and was taking her first steps onto free soil. The outcome wasn't a happy family reunion, but it was something far more important. It was the beginning of Ashley's real life. After the camera stopped rolling, the atmosphere backstage was heavy. The manufactured energy of television production evaporated, leaving a stark, quiet reality. Ashley was sitting in one of the green rooms, just staring at a bottle of water on the table in front of her. She wasn't crying anymore. She looked hollowed out, drained. People think the breakthrough moment is the climax, but it's not. It's the starting pistol. The race is what comes after, and it's a marathon, not a sprint. I sat down across from her. I didn't say anything for a minute. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is just sit in the silence with someone to let them know they're not alone in the emotional rubble. Finally, she looked up at me. She really meant it, didn't she? You're dead to me. She's never going to speak to me again. She might, I said, but it won't be because she's had a change of heart. It'll be when she needs something, and that will be your first real test. The phone will ring, and it will be her crying, telling you there's another crisis. It's an extinction burst. When you stop rewarding a bad behavior, the behavior often gets worse, more dramatic before it goes away. She's going to test your new walls to see if they're really made of brick or if they're still the same old drywall she can punch through. So I'm going to have to do this again, she asked, her voice filled with exhaustion. Yes, and again, I said not to be cruel, but to be honest, until she finally learns that the ATM is permanently out of service, or until you learn that you can withstand the guilt trips without caving. Either way, the change has to be in you, not her. You can't control her. You can only control your response to her. We talked for a long time. We talked about what recovery was going to look like. It wasn't just about the money. The money was a symptom. The disease was the enmeshment, the lack of boundaries, the lifetime of conditioning that had taught her to equate self-sacrifice with love. We got her connected with a therapist in her hometown, someone she could see that week. I told her, your work is just beginning. You're going to have to grieve. You're going to grieve the mother you wish you had. You're going to grieve the childhood you never got. You're going to feel angry and guilty and liberated and terrified all at the same time. And that's okay. All of those feelings are valid. This is the part the audience doesn't see. The follow-up. We don't just put people on a stage, blow up their lives, and then send them back to the airport. We provide resources aftercare because the confrontation on the show is a controlled demolition, but they still have to live in the aftermath. In the months that followed, we stayed in touch. Ashley's journey was exactly what I predicted, brutal but transformative. The first few weeks were a storm. Diane did, in fact, try to rally the family against her. Aunts, uncles, cousins, they all called parroting Diane's narrative about the cruel, ungrateful daughter who had publicly shamed her mother and left her destitute. Ashley had to put up boundaries with all of them, telling them, I'm not going to discuss my relationship with my mother with you. If you want a relationship with me, that topic is off limits. Some of them respected it. Many didn't. She had to prune her family tree, cutting off branches that were poisoned by her mother's narrative. It was a lonely, painful process. Then came the direct attacks from Diane. There were tearful voicemails, then angry texts, then letters filled with accusations. She tried every tool in her manipulative toolkit. She tried guilt. I can't afford my heart medication because of you. She tried pity. All my friends are going on a cruise and I have to sit here all alone because my daughter abandoned me. She even tried love bombing, sending a birthday card with a long, saccharine message about how much she loved and missed her little girl with a P. S, asking if Ashley could just help her out with a small loan to fix her water heater. Each one of these was a test, and Ashley passed them. It was excruciating. She told me on the phone once that hanging up on her mother felt like ripping off a piece of her own skin. But with each boundary she held, the walls got stronger. She was deprogramming herself one painful interaction at a time. Meanwhile, she was working with her therapist, unpacking 30 years of emotional baggage. She was learning about narcissistic personality disorder, not to diagnose her mother, but to understand the playbook, to see the patterns. She learned that it wasn't her fault. 3 of the most powerful words in the English language. It wasn't her fault. The outcome for Diane was less encouraging, but just as predictable. With her primary source of income and emotional supply cut off, she didn't have a moment of clarity. She didn't get a second job or learn to budget. She simply found a new host. She moved in with her sister, another enabler, and soon the dynamic started to repeat itself with her sister now funding the crises and managing her moods. The pattern didn't change, it just relocated. This is a hard truth. You can't fix another person. They have to want to fix themselves. Diane didn't see anything as broken. In her mind, the only thing broken was Ashley. But the real story is Ashley. About a year after the show, she sent me an email. She had paid off her credit card debt, she had refunded her IRA, and was contributing to it regularly. She had even started a small savings account for a down payment on that condo. These were the financial victories. But the real victory was in the last paragraph of her email. She wrote, "For the first time in my life, I wake up in the morning and my first thought isn't, I wonder what mom needs today. My first thought is, what do I want to do today? I'm starting to get to know myself. I'm discovering I like hiking. I'm learning to cook. I'm dating a nice man who treats me like a partner, not a project. I feel quiet inside. I didn't know that was possible." That's the win. It's not a perfect happy ending. Her relationship with her mother is gone likely forever. Her family is fractured. There are scars, but she's free. She traded a toxic, counterfeit version of love for a chance at a real, authentic life. And that's a trade I'd advise anyone to make any day of the week. This case wasn't about a bank account, it was about a soul. And Ashley finally got hers back.